everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Zonen Canada podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. This show is going to be about the relationship between Japanese animation and Canadian media. Now, a lot of my focus is going to be on television, since it is a popular topic, and really is still seen as the best way to introduce a niche medium like anime to new audiences who would otherwise never discover it. This is of particular interest because, as you may have heard, Canadian cable and satellite providers are going to be transitioning to a pick-and-pay model in the near future. That's going to create an interesting situation for television as a platform that allows people to discover content, since consumers are now going to be able to just pay for the stations they want and leave behind the ones they don't. I'm sure this is going to come up a bit later in today's episode, but what we're starting off with here is a multi-part roundtable discussion about anime on Canadian TV. And I've gathered a few people here today to participate in this discussion, so let's go around the table and have everyone introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I am in the Toronto area, and I write for Moon Chase, a Sailor Moon news blog, and you can find us at moon-chase.com.
Okay.
My name is Mark Gagnon. I'm from Fredericton, New Brunswick. I'm a student journalist, and I guess my qualification to be here is that I've been a geek on the internet for a very long time.
You know what? That's a perfectly adequate qualification, if you ask me.
And my name is Kevin, and I am a participant of the Linked to Japan podcast, where you can find us at linkedtojapan.wordpress.com. We talk about Japanese animation, comics, video games, all that stuff. And that's pretty much it about me.
Okay, great. And again, I'm Jesse. I'm an MA student in communication at Simon Fraser University, and I'm just a huge anime fan, and I've always been really into talking about anime on Canadian TV and Canadian media and things like that. So here's how things are going to work today. I'm going to go around the table with 3 questions. First, I'm going to ask everyone about their favorite memories of anime on Canadian broadcasters. Second, I'm going to ask what they feel is the biggest missed opportunity for anime on TV in this country. And third, I'm going to ask everyone about any hopes or expectations they might have for the future. And I know they all have a lot to say, as I'm sure anyone would. So let's go around the table and get started. Emily, we'll start with you. What is, one of your favorite memories about anime on Canadian TV? Multiple memories? What is important to you?
There's a few different times that really stick out in my mind. I think what really got me into anime the most was Sailor Moon. That was basically my gateway anime. I had seen other anime before that, but that was really the thing that got me very interested in anime, and I wanted to see more of it and explore it. And I made some friends who also liked Sailor Moon at the time. And so that was a good turning point for me, and I got interested in drawing more, and I'm actually a professional graphic designer and illustrator now, so it kind of transitioned into a lot of things for me. Also, I ended up, with one of my good friends in high school, we watched a lot of the anime at night that was showing on Teletoon in space, and we bonded over those things, and then renting anime from video stores. Jumbo Video, which no longer exists, and
yeah.
and that kind of thing. When I was really small, I also watched something that was called Fables of the Green Forest on TVO. So that would have been in the 80s. And so that was one of my first animes. And then, moving forward, when we had Bionics on YTV, I would actually watch that with both my mom and my sister a lot of the time. And
that's great.
I just kind of dragged them in. And so that's it for me, for my fond memories.
With Sailor Moon, I know you had a lot of fandom circles and things going on with that. Did you find that most people who were involved with that were Canadian? Were there a lot of Americans, international audiences?
Well, with Sailor Moon, when I first got into it, I first started watching it in late 1995. I didn't have access to the internet at that time. It wasn't until a few years later that I really got online. So I wasn't exposed to that. It was more of a local thing, and actually seeing fan-dub VHS tapes being sold in malls and stuff.
Fan-dub?
Sorry, fan-sub. And then I was in Pathfinders, which is connected to Girl Guides. It's just the next level up.
Yeah.
And a lot of the girls in my Pathfinder group were kind of sort of interested in Sailor Moon. And so we would kind of discuss it a little bit there, and I would discuss it with my friends at school. But there's also, not a lot of people were really into anime in where I was going to school and stuff. So,
well, this would have been like 95, 96 as well.
Yeah. So like it started when I was in grade 8 was when I started watching. And I was a bit bullied then. So, something that I really was into was not going to be something that was going to be popular, of course. And then when I went to grade 9 and I started at a new school, and then I just was open about it because that's the kind of person that I am. If I like something, then I like it. And if someone else doesn't like it, well, they don't have to like it. Right? But I made some friends who also liked Sailor Moon, and then there were some people who didn't get it. They didn't understand anime. Part of it, though, was also because for me, it was the beginning of high school. It's also kind of a time where everyone is trying really hard to prove that they're not a kid anymore. So, animation in general kind of gets, seen as this childish thing, because they're not in this time now where it's more open. You see a lot more variety, and so people just react as the kind of way that they tend to when it's something they don't understand. They just kind of want to push it away and leave it in a little box over there. I found that, once you got into the later grades, people didn't really care anymore. They were just like, well, whatever, that's your thing. I don't have to like it, but if you like it, that's cool. People were more mature then, but towards, like the end of elementary school and the beginning of high school, everyone is kind of like in attack mode, and they don't want to, believe that there could be something in there that isn't just for children, especially when it's something, like Sailor Moon had a lot of changes made to it to gear it to a younger audience than it was originally intended for.
There's some great YouTube videos of the commercials that ran during Sailor Moon, which are all for Sailor Moon merchandise and accessories, which would be so blatantly illegal here.
They used to do that now. I feel like they used to do that. Maybe they stopped that, The kind of merchandise that they had here, like, I don't know what it was like across the country. I was living in Newmarket at the time, and so, like, I wasn't going to things like Pacific Mall, and I hadn't been to conventions yet. So I was just going to the local mall and whatever they had there, and it would be like a lot of the sticker cards, and you'd see some T-shirts and that kind of thing, and posters, and then these subtitled videos that were obviously bootlegs, but at the time I didn't even know what a bootleg was. Yeah. I was just like, oh my gosh, it's Sailor Moon, this is exciting.
Yeah, with a lot of the actual merchandise, I think Irwin was the company that I think did the Sailor Moon merchandise, but I know, it had quite a big push here. I don't think the merchandise took off so much in the States. I think a lot of that stuff was actually only in Canada because, until Sailor Moon started on Toonami in, I think, like 99 or even 2000, it didn't really have a lot of traction of outside of Canada.
It was difficult for them to find the right network in the States from what I could tell. There is certainly a huge fan base now, right? And it's been growing over the years. But I remember that when we would go on family vacations when I was younger and Sailor Moon was still on the air, it was very difficult to find it on even the kinds of stations that we would have in the hotels and resorts that we were staying in. And I think it was on something that I think it was USA Network or something like that.
They picked it up later.
But it was it might have had a different name at the time. But it was like on early mornings. Yeah. I know Fox tried to do a small run at some point, but they didn't really know what to do with it. Before USA Network, it ran just in syndication. So, like, some Fox networks would pick it up. It would show up in some other blocks. Where I live, in Vancouver, or near Seattle,
the Fox affiliate here, I think they ran one episode of Sailor Moon R at like 6:30 in the morning on Saturday at one time, and as far as I know, that's all that ran. So it got a lot of pretty bad time slots in the States, whereas in Canada, well, YTV was making a whole deal of picking up shows that were in syndication and just sort of embracing it and showcasing it, which is.
Well, also, Global TV was airing it in
that's right,
school
yeah.
slot as well,
Yeah.
and that was also a good slot to have for kids who are eating breakfast before they're getting ready for school. And then YTV would do the after-school slot. So it was really easy for the audience they were targeting to see it. Now, my impression when I got to know more about Sailor Moon later was that it was more of a preteen kind of focused show.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the age that I was when I first started watching it. I was 13 years old. So I was actually part of the correct target market from the original, but a lot of things ended up being skewed a bit younger due to, cultural differences or concerns that parents might be upset about certain things, trying to tone down certain violent elements. And then, of course, we had things that were changed where, they didn't want to have any homosexual relationships because that wasn't really too in focus at the time. I think it was like a couple years or so before Ellen came out, and then people really started to talk about it in mainstream.
Yeah.
And that was not really something that they really wanted to have on what was supposed to be a kids show. They thought it was too risque.
Now it continues to be contentious in kid shows. I mean, it's a dialogue that's happening in kid shows now, but I mean, here we are 20 years later.
And even when because they had that break before they went into S and Supers, and that ended up coming out in 99, 2000, something like that.
Yeah, after that was because of the Toonami run in the States.
And they still went and changed the relationship between Uranus and Neptune.
Oh yeah.
And them cousins, right?
Yet they still made sexual innuendo at each other.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sorry, but when one girl is looking down another girl's shirt like that is not a cousin kind of thing to do.
Here's the fun thing about that is that the DVDs for S and Supers that Geneon put out, the footage is all uncut, and it's because it has the Japanese version. You can watch the Japanese version with the subtitles on that release, but they also included the dub. Because I guess why not? We have a dub laying around. Let's put it in. But the thing is that on that dub, they never did retakes to change their relationship back to lovers from cousins. So you actually have all of the visual signifiers of them, like that very blatantly indicates that they're in a relationship, still intact, and they're still referring to each other as their cousin.
They should have just gone the extra step and given them southern accents at that point, I think.
Most of them all had like very neutral kind of accents, and then we had Molly who had like this random New York accent, and everyone was just like,
and her mother did not have a New York accent.
Yeah, her mother did not have an accent, so how did that happen?
Oh.
Yeah.
And then Luna, of course, was British. And
British
then
nanny voice. Yeah,
and then you're like,
yeah.
Well, but Artemis doesn't have an accent, and they were from the same place. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Didn't it come out that someone in Japan, maybe even the original creator, actually preferred the British voice for Luna, as opposed to the young girl voice she had in Japan?
Ooh.
I'm not.
I think I heard that somewhere. It might just be anecdotal, but.
I'm not sure about that because the voice that they have now in the new dub is Michelle Ruff, and she's a much younger voice,
Right.
and definitely not British.
She plays it as much more of a cool aunt kind of voice compared to Crush the Old Nanny. I mean, not to say that the old Luna voice didn't have its charm, of course, but it was less accurate. But Takeuchi has a pretty firm grasp on everything that goes down with adaptation now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And she's supposed to be, listening to all the voices that they're choosing as well. She's having some say in that. So that's interesting, to see a property become that significant that the creator can have that amount of control, that they can actually go and say in other languages which voice they prefer to be the characters.
Yeah. Too bad we can't legally watch that dub right now. Oh, I guess on DVD and Blu-ray we can, but not streaming.
Yes, we're still waiting for that.
Still waiting. We'll probably get into that issue in a future episode. All right. Anything else, Emily?
No, I think that's it for question 1.
Yeah, I think Sailor Moon's important. I think we can't understate that, and I think we covered all the big things there. So let's move on to Mark. Mark, looking back, anything big you wanna discuss or talk about?
The very first memory I have is watching Astro Boy.
Oh yeah?
So I think that gives you an idea of how far back it goes. There was a 1980 version that was animated in color, and I remember seeing that when I couldn't have been any older than 3 or 4, and that just struck in my mind for decades. And even at that age, I could differentiate it from Western cartoons. Oh
wow.
DuckTales or whatever else was on. There was such a bizarreness to it that just really sunk in my brain, and maybe that was the root of it all. But yeah, those were kind of the earlier shows where you would see them and maybe you were too young to know that it was, what we would call anime now, but you still could recognize that the animation was done slightly differently, that you didn't have the wacky takes like you had in Western animation. And sometimes you could even tell that the storylines were a bit darker. I do remember watching an anime adaptation of The Jungle Book, maybe a couple of years later, and I don't know if it aired in English or French, but that one actually had graphic, maybe, I don't know if I'd call it graphic violence, but, animals fighting and killing each other. And, again, when the most serious shows on the time were something like, a Darkwing Duck, that was pretty hardcore, I have to say, at the time. But yeah, you probably jump straight from there to when Dragon Ball first, and Sailor Moon, probably the double whammy, I would call them, in the mid-90s. And that pretty much blew me away at the time, I have to say.
Yeah, with the Jungle Book one, I'm not sure if that was a World Masterpiece Theater title. You mentioned you might have caught it in French.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a number of those ran on Radio Canada. Learned about that way too late, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I was into Sailor Moon just as much as everyone else in Canada around that age would have been. I was a little bit more surreptitious about it. I didn't want my guy friends to know I was really into that show. So, I would watch it and, cry because I was so moved, and then I would go, and not let anyone know the next day. I remember buying a pack of Sailor Moon trading cards because it was the first piece of Sailor Moon memorabilia I had found, and I was so blown away, but I even had to tell the cashier that it was for my imaginary sister. So, even then I couldn't really admit it to myself. But it was
at least I had a real sister to reference.
There you go.
Yeah.
It was really Dragon Ball Z that kicked it off for me, and I don't think the first run of it that I saw was on Canadian TV. I'm pretty sure it was a Fox affiliate, and it aired very early in the morning on Sundays. Like, I'm talking like 7:30.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure this was at least a year or two before it had begun to air on YTV, because Dragon Ball, the entire run of Dragon Ball that, YTV had, it was finished by that point. So I was, vaguely familiar with the characters, and then Dragon Ball Z comes on and it's a time skip of, I forget what it is, 15 years or something. I pretty much had to pick up the pieces at that point. But that was a pretty huge obsession for me, all through my high school years, I have to say.
Yeah, that was neat. Over here, Dragon Ball Z was airing on KVOS, which is
right.
An independent broadcaster out of Bellevue, or Bellingham, I can't remember which. And this was a couple years after YTV had been running Dragon Ball, which barely got any playtime in the States as well. So I had known, like, there's lots of Chinese Korean students at the schools I went to, and
sure.
They would have like Dragon Ball Z backpacks and even a few Dragon Ball GT backpacks a little further into middle school as well.
Yeah, because that would have been finished in Japan by the time, right?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. I talked to some of my friends about it too, and they had seen later more of Dragon Ball, and they had seen Dragon Ball Z, which, for a few years between the time that YTV stopped airing Dragon Ball and before I found Dragon Ball Z, it was like, oh, it's like these fabled later episodes that I'll never know because the show got canceled and they're continuing it. And then suddenly I saw Dragon Ball Z on, and it was just kind of neat to see them skipping ahead that far. I mean,
yeah, I think it was the mystique that really did it for me, because again, this was before I had internet access, right?
Yeah.
So, we went from watching the first run of Dragon Ball, which was probably only 20 some episodes, I think.
13.
God, it's even less than I thought.
But they ran it a lot.
They did. They really did. And so going from that to the first arc of Dragon Ball, the Saiyan arc, and, I must have seen that at least a half dozen times the complete way through before they finally moved on to the Namek stuff. But, I would watch that on TV. And then, I don't know if you remember back then, gaming magazines, like PC Gamer, Game Pro, these sorts of things, they would have ads in the back for Japanese import companies.
Oh, yes. I remember that quite distinctly.
Yeah, and they would have Dragon Ball Z merchandise, like little posters, just thumbnail-sized pictures of posters, video games. But they had all these characters. I had no idea who they were, the Super Saiyans and, Cell and Boo. And I was so, intrigued by these characters. I would draw all these elaborate drawings, just based on the tiny 1-inch thumbnails. And I was, kind of begging to see what would happen with these characters. And I remember very clearly the day that YTV finally aired the new episode, the first Namek episode. Mm-hmm. Because I was fully expecting it to loop back around to the first episode of Dragon Ball Z, as it had done like a half dozen times. And then when it actually, said previously, and it was the previous episode they were recapping, and it said something like Return to Namek, and I fell out of my chair, because that was just, Oh God, it's finally moving on after all this time. But the interesting thing about Dragon Ball, and I don't know how far this went outside of my region, because I'm in New Brunswick and we're pretty close to Quebec. We got the Quebec stations. We got TQS. And I think it was a bit later, but this would have been in like maybe 97, 98. They were actually airing uncut episodes of Dragon Ball Z very early in the morning at 6:37, and this blew me away. Now, by this time I had internet access, so I was aware of how much Dragon Ball Z was being edited. There was a website called Dragon Ball Z Uncensored, and it was devoted to documenting every glob of blood that was painted out, every, cut scene, that sort of thing. And then I turn on the French station and, they're using the actual honorifics, Son Goku, that sort of thing. The blood is completely edited. The music was original. And they would even use the original voice acting during fighting scenes because they didn't want to bother dubbing the grunts.
Yeah, that's just lazy.
But it was still awesome because for that, 30 seconds or whatever, I was watching the original Japanese Dragon Ball Z, which blew my mind. Again, unfortunately, they only had the license to the Saiyan saga, which is pretty tragic. But, I put all of those on tape and I kind of supplemented. Well, I was already taping Dragon Ball Z, so I had sort of the French collection as well.
Yeah, one thing that in these roundtables, one thing that we're definitely lacking is perspectives from Quebecers, and there's all sorts of stuff that aired on the public and specialty channels in Quebec. I think a huge glut of the stuff that aired in France in the late 80s, early 90s. I think just about all of it showed up in Quebec at some point. But if you weren't actually in the province, then you're not really. Most people wouldn't be really be aware of it. So I'm hoping I can find some people who can contribute more information on that in the future.
Well, I think I told you I have seen magazines from Quebec that had DVDs with Captain Harlock or Albator, as it was known in French. So I have to imagine that there was some circulation of that in Quebec. They also aired a French version of Cardcaptor Sakura that I watched a fair amount of, and I believe that was fully unedited too. Which that was another show I'm sure that was butchered pretty heavily by a network that kind of wanted to make it into a completely different show.
Yeah. French Teletoon aired that show unedited, I believe, one of the handful of unedited French dubs that showed up on that network. They had Naruto at one point later on too. And well, I mean, to Teletoon's credit, they at least aired Cardcaptor's dub. They aired the episodes in the correct order at one point.
It's such an innocuous show, the fact that it was butchered so heavily is still so bizarre to me. I mean, there's so many Japanese boy shows you could have brought over. Why would you bring over this show that's clearly aimed at young girls and, try and warp it into this thing that it wasn't?
That was so weird that they even tried to do that. It was like, and it's not like it was like the first show of its kind to come like that,
Yeah.
So it's like they suddenly forgot that girls watch TV too.
Well, I mean,
basically,
I'm sure when Nelvana picked up the show that they had some kind of intention to market it properly, but something probably came up along the way.
Yeah, but I mean, between I think that and Escaflowne were the two female-led shows that they just tried desperately to hide the fact that they were female-led.
Yeah, well, Escaflowne.
Isn't that Fox that tried to do that with Escaflowne?
Yeah, they picked up Escaflowne because they didn't want Toonami to get it. And then when they hadn't actually really watched the show, so they wound up editing it quite significantly, at least for the portion that aired on US TV. Then it was canceled after 7 episodes. But we got the whole thing on YTV, of course.
Oh, I didn't know it was because they didn't want Toonami to get. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
The story is that one of the Toonami sort of planners had mentioned in an interview that they wanted Escaflowne, so Fox jumped on it. But which, I mean, they butchered those first few episodes. But, I mean, the episodes that didn't air on Fox were edited for YTV, which means they were basically unedited. They painted out some blood and that was about it. Plus, they tacked the real first episode onto the end of the run, too. So we actually, the second run started with the proper first episode, which was nice. It was something anyway. I mean, I think of it this way, if Saban had never gotten involved with Escaflowne, it probably never would have shown up here. If Toonami had gotten it, we wouldn't have. I'm almost certain of that.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think from there it jumped up to Gundam Wing, which I think blew quite a lot of people away, even from the title screen, with the unedited Japanese text. And I think at that point everyone knew that they were, I think there was an appeal to keep that inherent Japaneseness to it.
Yeah.
And, I think that show was pretty influential. And I think after that point, anime more or less dried up on Canadian TV, and I had to transition to VHS tapes to kind of feed my habit up until Bionics premiered. And I will say, without shame, well, maybe a little bit of shame, that I watched every single episode of Bionics for the entire run from 2004 to 2010. That gives you an indication of how little of a social life I had at the time. That I am a little sad to see that that's kind of withered up, but we're in the new media era, as they call it, so we'll see where things go.
For sure. All right, thanks, Mark. Kevin, let's move on to you next.
Ooh, so I did catch Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball, as they were airing, but I would say I was definitely a Pokemon kid.
Ah, yes.
See, I was around grade 3, grade 4 when Pokemon blew up, and it was quite something, the TV show was playing, the cards came out, the games for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color were out, and I remember begging my mother for a Game Boy Color and Pokemon Red. It was, I don't know, I look back on it pretty fondly because you look back on it now and while Pokemon's not as big as it used to be, it was not in the same magnitude as it was in the past, it's still a fairly large franchise, but back then, oh man, it was just amazing. I look back on it pretty fondly. I didn't like Gundam Wing that much, actually. I always found the show very boring and dry.
Did you still go out of your way to watch it at the time it was airing?
No, actually. The show just annoyed me because even in the beginning, it felt like there was a lot of just politics going on, and it just felt very boring to me. And I thought Zex Marquise, I thought his name was Lieutenant Sex. I always heard Lieutenant Sex instead of Zex.
You know what?
For about half the show.
If you go back and look at a lot of those Gundam names, I think that may have been intentional. I mean, Zeta Gundam had a villain whose name was basically Hyman, so.
Let's not forget Quattro Vagina.
Oh yeah.
I will say, just to cut in briefly, that Gundam Wing, I think, only really seems sophisticated when you're comparing it to Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, I actually did rewatch Wing last year, and it does not hold up well. See, that Gundam Wing was when I first realized, this stuff probably isn't this is not, from North America. That's when I realized it was from Japan. And then we had the whole glut of nothing on YTV other than, kids properties. Then I actually stumbled onto Bionics that very first night, and the show that actually hooked me as a fan of anime was Witch Hunter Robin.
Oh, interesting.
It was definitely not like anything I had seen up until that point. And I don't know, I really liked its atmosphere. It had that really dark, dreary atmosphere that hooked me in spite of the Witch of the Week hunts. But in the end, I got so into that show that later on that year, Bandai released that Witch Hunter Robin box set that costed, $150. And I went to my first fan expo that year, and even as a 9th grader, I was like, okay, I really like this show. I'm gonna plop the money for it. And I plopped down, I think, 180 for Witch Hunter Robin. That's how much I love that show. And then I think YTV even re-aired that show at least twice.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it was a really great. Oh, I still love it now. It's like I look back on that show very fondly. And I guess if I had to pick one more memorable moment for me was when Beck Mongolian Chop Squad aired on Much Music.
That was pretty big. Yeah,
I remember that was amazing, yeah.
Like, I have to really give kudos to Chum, rest in peace, because they tried to, they played different musical programming, because they also picked up, what was that animated show with Andre 3000 in it?
Classic
3000?
Yeah.
Which is normally
two bizarre shows to put together, but.
Because that's a Cartoon Network show, I believe, but that was really awesome too, because I did not expect much to do that. But then again, you look at what Chum did with Razor as well. I guess you could sort of see it, but I guess those would be the three things for me.
All right.
Beck was special.
Yeah, those are definitely three kind of standout things. And I think what you said about Witch Hunter Robin, I think applies to a lot of people. I think the reason that show really took off here because it was just such a wild contrast from pretty much everything we had been used to, at least for the 5 or 6 years preceding it anyway.
I had actually watched that show, Fansubbed, a couple of years prior, and the fact that I was now seeing it on YTV, which, again, had really aired nothing but Dragon Ball Z and Gundam, to me was a sign of the fact that they were taking this seriously and they were pursuing relatively modern titles.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll finish off this section with my thoughts. If we're going back to very early memories, my first would be Samurai Pizza Cats. I think there was some kind of indication or something that ticked me off to the fact that this show was from Japan. I wasn't really concerned about that. I didn't care at the time. I just found it really funny. I still find it really funny. I bought Discotek's release of that, and I'm very happy I did. But I didn't really become consciously aware of what anime was until I saw it talked about a lot in the Anti-Gravity Room.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, I haven't heard that name in a while either.
Yeah, you can find some clips on YouTube if you haven't watched it for a while. Or
that brings back some real memories.
Yeah.
That was my first exposure to any sort of underground comic books, and that was a real treasure.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And then also, as Mark said, I think reading a lot of ads and stuff in the back of video game magazines is sort of what helped grow my awareness of anime just as a thing, as a foreign product. And I stumbled on Gundam Wing eventually. Before that, one of the most vivid memories I have was seeing Go Shogun Timetrange, or also known as Time Stranger, air on Space. It aired over here in Pacific Standard Time. It aired at 4:30 p.m. on a Saturday, and I caught one of the subtitled airings of that movie, and that's one of my definitive, I'm 12 years old, what is this moments.
My girlfriend actually asked me to thank you for that because she had seen it as well when she was younger, and it was driving her crazy because it was such a bizarre film, and she couldn't think of any way to search for it, and I actually had to reach out to you and find out what it was. So I'm amazed you actually remembered that thing.
I remembered the movie. It wasn't until just a little while before that I had found out what it was, and it's because Justin Sudeikis wrote about it on Anime News Network in his Buried Treasure column. Even that I missed it the first time. I had to go back and dig it out, and I'm like, oh, this is that movie I've been trying to find the title for the past decade. Okay. But yeah, that's always really stuck with me, and I watched it again recently, and it's really interesting movie. If you're not sure, if you don't know what it is we're talking about, it's that movie where the woman who used to be part of a military mecha squad gets into a car accident, she falls into a coma, and she is trapped in this dreamscape world in her head with all of her old comrades from her military squad. Although no mecha actually show up in the movie. It's a spin-off from an old mecha show called Go Shogun, but it has almost nothing to do with that show. And she's basically fighting for her own survival, and it's manifested in the form of this big black cat that she has to try and shoot at the end. Yeah, it's really weird. It's almost like not really something that you'd expect to be spun off from, a comedy mecha show. But if you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out. Or if you vaguely remember it, that's the title, so you can go pursue it now. Yeah,
I watched it when you recommended it, and it seems it's very much ahead of its time. It's animated very traditionally like an 80s mecha show, but it almost seems like something that, Satoshi Kon would have directed 10 or 15 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have to give it props there.
Yeah, and the guy who directed it is now he's now directing Pokemon movies. That's his job. But hey, you can't get a much more steady paycheck in that industry than that. So
It's one hell of a career trajectory, though.
yeah, good on him. It'd be neat to see him do something else original in the future, but
Yeah.
he's doing well, so I'm happy for that.
I think on that Time Changer DVD, they think they even say from the director of Pokemon. It's just like,
I'm sure
wow,
they do.
really?
I can understand them trying to make a buck, but wow, that's a pretty bad recommendation.
Yeah. And for one other memory, it actually has to be a little before Bionic started, but when Inuyasha first aired on YTV, when they started airing it 10 p.m. on Friday nights, I remember sitting down, just like I didn't know what to expect. The idea of them running like a non-heavily localized anime in primetime hours was so unthinkable at the time that I was just glued to my seat waiting in anticipation for it to show up. And like when it kicked in and I saw the Japanese intro airing, I was so unspeakably happy. Yeah, I'm ashamed to admit it. It was one of my most satisfying moments of my life up to that point.
They shouldn't be ashamed of that.
Oh, I know I shouldn't be, but I mean, I was in high school, so.
Yeah, no, that was deeply impactful for me as well.
Yeah.
I mean, because we had known we knew what was going on sort of behind the scenes a bit more at that point. So the fact that it was airing there relatively uncut was a real win, I think.
Yeah, it was just just that moment we had just opened up so much promise for what could happen in the future. And I mean, a lot of
I want to change the world.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
and it just so many and I mean it led to great things, and really Inuyasha really probably was the best show that YTV could have picked up at that time, and they were the only ones who wanted to do it at the time, and it paid off enormously. So I mean, we can't lose sight of how important Inuyasha was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that wraps up for the first part. So we'll move on to the second question. We'll start with Emily again. What do you think is one of the biggest missed opportunities for anime on TV in this country?
Well, I think touching back to how Beck was on Much Music, and just that we haven't really seen anime break out into mainstream television stations. Sure. It was almost there, and then it didn't happen.
Imagine if Nana was on Much Music.
That would have been great.
I think people had talked about that after Beck was
there was a lot of speculation
airing for a little while. There were a lot of people who were saying that would be a really good follow-up. But then, of course, with the change of ownership, it just wasn't possible for that to even happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would have really liked to see some stuff, Space make another attempt and get stuff that is, more modern and would be, just be more choosy about the kinds of things that they would air. Like if they had gone and aired something like Evangelion, it would have been a really good fit for them. But they never did. And nobody ever did.
Evangelion is definitely a huge missed opportunity. I think we are one of, if not the only English-speaking country where Eva hasn't aired on television.
It's insane.
Because we eventually got Cowboy Bebop.
Yes.
We eventually got Trigun.
But Cowboy Bebop ended up being on, what was it, Razor?
Yeah.
It was Razor.
And not really that many people got that,
I've never even heard of Razor, so there you go.
That was like,
it was another chum channel.
It was a Canadian version of MTV kind of thing. It wasn't very good, and it was a little all over the place.
Yeah, it was after they couldn't call it MTV2 anymore, they rebranded it as Razor and just tried to make it into a general young adult kind of oriented station. And one of those stations that's just willing to try anything and throw out anything they can and see what sticks. And they tried anime, and it seemed to do fairly well for them. They ran a few shows. They picked up.
It was such a grab bag of things.
Yeah.
That it's like.
Oh yeah.
There was no direction, so I think it was hard to really build an audience when when nobody can really tell if they actually want to keep watching the station.
Well, they grabbed Bebop and Shampoo at the same time, and they were both owned by different distributors at the time too. So I mean, they knew what to go for, and I think if they'd been going on a little longer, maybe they would have grabbed Ava. Cause and apparently, dealing with ADV for any kind of TV rights has apparently always been really difficult. Toonami and Adult Swim even today seem to be having trouble dealing with them, or rather Sentai Filmworks.
Yeah, because ADV doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, well, they do, like, in some form, but they just can't do anything. It's complicated stuff. But also, as for stuff airing on mainstream TV, yeah, I like to think that if Chum had not been bought out by CTV or at least had gone on for a couple more years, we may have seen a little more experimenting like that. Nana, which I believe was dubbed in Vancouver too, would have been great on Much. It almost seems kind of obvious, like an obvious follow-up to Beck. And again, they were doing stuff with Razor. I could have seen Razor picking up, more titles that have been looked over. I mean, we never got Evangelion. The Big O is one that we've never gotten and was always in the States too.
Mm-hmm.
That one hurts.
Well, we actually never got the Supernatural anime, but we had the Supernatural series airing on mainstream TV here, and that would have been a really easy thing to kind of just throw in there.
Did that show up on TV anywhere?
I don't think it did. I didn't really follow it, but that would have been something that would have been kind of like an easy one to start with and kind of test the waters. And then you could kind of expand from there and, start being a little bit more experimental. Cowboy Bebop, I think it would have also been really good on space. But pretty much any big sci-fi title would have been really good on there. And, there was, while they were experimenting with, Razor was showing some things and G4 tried to pick up a couple of titles. And then a little while after that, it kind of started to fizzle, and then there were a couple of titles that ended up being on Rogers On Demand, because we subscribe to Rogers Cable here. And one of the titles I saw that way was Razafon, and that would have been fantastic on space.
I love that show.
It's like a more modern Evangelion in a way, but also different, right? And that would have been a really great title for them to start with and break into it. And I could see that being wildly successful. I also would really love to see Showcase get into anime because they seem like they're open to anything.
Well, they were.
And, they get all sorts of stuff, right? But, I don't recall ever seeing any anime on there. So it would be interesting to see, where they would go with it because they could get stuff that would be a little bit more unusual that might not fit anywhere else. And it would still work there.
Okay. So Mark, what do you have any big missed opportunities that you had in mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to touch on what Emily said for a moment, I do remember that moment in Canadian TV, probably would have been around, 2006 or so, where you had G4, I think they were airing Tenjo Tenge, you had anime on Rogers On Demand. I think Beck on Much was around that period, and for a brief second, it did seem like there was almost this spark of hope, but they all kind of went down the toilet pretty quickly.
Yeah.
One thing, though, it's always kind of been my white whale, and I don't know if this is really a Canadian issue. It might be more with Bandai, but I honestly think that there wasn't really an attempt made to follow up the popularity of Gundam Wing on TV. And what I always thought, and this, I think I may be the only person in the world who thinks this, they should have gotten the license for Gundam X, which was kind of the spiritual sequel to it in Japan. And I realize it didn't get particularly good ratings, but I don't think the 12-year-old kids in Canada would have really cared about the Japanese ratings. I mean, the character designs were almost, virtually, identical, had the same sort of music. And I think they could have parlayed that, into a fairly big success, but I don't know whether, Canadian broadcasters even knew it existed, whether Bandai wanted to license it out or whatever. But I always think that, what if they had aired that in 2000? It probably could have been a hit.
On Toonami, one of the most infamous missteps for Gundam in general in the United States was that, Bandai, Sunrise and Bandai in Japan were insistent that Gundam Wing be followed up with the original Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979.
Yeah. Wow.
Which did not do well at all on Toonami in the United States. And it, they followed it up with G, which I think did okay. But it was just sort of losing water after that. And then and then Seed really was a big flop in the States. Whereas it did well here because we didn't have that sort of intervening time where the franchise kind of floundered, and it was just more kind of anticipation here that went on for 5 or so years. I do. Sorry, Kevin.
Oh, sorry. Our episodes were less edited as well.
For Seed, yeah, that helped.
Yeah.
There were a number of things that helped Seed do a little better up here than it did in the States, but I still think the biggest thing was just that anticipation that came along with it, that came from the sort of 5-year drought. I do agree with you, Mark, that X in general would have been the better follow-up to Wing than 0079, and it just has this stigma in Japan because it was canceled really early.
Same thing with Victory Gundam, I think, because that only came a couple of years before Wing. It could have easily fit into that same time slot, but like you said, the Japanese distributors, for whatever reason, felt that these were failures, and maybe it was a sort of a case that they didn't want to put their best foot forward internationally, but they didn't really get a sense of what would play here versus play in Japan.
We are at long last getting Turn A on DVD this year, though. So I mean, that's nice.
Well, I was actually going to say, I mean, Turn A, I think it was out in '99 or something. They could have theoretically dubbed it very quickly, and that may have been a hit, but again, they kind of buried it in the sand for whatever reason.
Yeah, they had a very weird idea of what would work on Western television.
Yeah. The other big miss, I think, was that we never got the weekly anime slot in the evening, the sort of our version of Toonami, because, Bionics was good, but the one time a week format meant that they could only run so many shows. Yeah. And that meant that, again, we didn't have access to, they could have shifted the younger skewing shows to weeknights, and we could have had stuff like Cowboy Bebop, Evangelion, on, weekends or that sort of thing. I think that's probably the big miss. When Bionics was still on, I mean, I remember looking at the YTV schedule for the rest of weekday evenings, and I think it was something like there was like a 2-hour block of SpongeBob and a 2-hour block of Fairly Odd Parents, and I was like, really? That's the best you can do with that primetime slot?
Well, they did air episodes of Seed, Inuyasha, and Full Metal Alchemist on weeknights for a while too.
Okay.
Yeah.
How late were we talking though?
10 o'clock, 10:30.
Actually, Inuyasha aired as early as 8:30, if I remember correctly.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't recall that.
Yeah.
But I mean, they never, they aired reruns, right? They didn't license any new stuff to fill those slots, so again,
no. You
didn't really get any new series. I think One Piece would have gone over really well on YTV if it hadn't been butchered to hell and back.
Oh man. Yeah. One Piece has had such a tumultuous history. In just English language television in general. Unfortunately, it's starting to look like we're at a point now where it may never be able to get its foot in the door. It's quite lucky to even be airing, as late as it does on Adult Swim right now. They seem pretty insistent on keeping it on the air, but it just can't grab the audience that it really should be grabbing.
I remember when it premiered on Fox all those years ago. I remember reading somewhere that they had kept maybe not the original Japanese opening, but had just translated it. And then when it started, and it was that awful pirate rap.
They did. They had a faithful translation of the opening that they showed at some trade shows. They didn't wind up using it.
Yeah. What a shame.
Yeah.
God. Yeah, that's about it for me.
All right. So Kevin, we'll move on to you. Biggest missed opportunity in your opinion?
Oh, a lot of them have been named, like Nana and Evangelion. I guess one that I would pick that has not been mentioned is a lot of the Blue Water dubs for anime that never really came on the air. Like, I'm looking at a list of them now. Like, I think My Hime could have worked.
Really?
On YTV. I think it could have. It had a lot of action in it. I guess there was those fan service elements to it, but
yeah, there's a lot of kind of weird sexuality in the show too. But I mean, some Stranger stuff has aired on YTV after all, so, I mean, who am I to say?
Jungle Cruise.
I recall, and I guess other ocean dubs too, like, I don't know, like Shauna or Elemental Jaleid, for example, just throwing some names out there. Like, I don't know, there was potential there. And I guess one show I would have loved to have seen on YTV was Wolf's Rain, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, that was a great show.
I for one didn't appreciate it at the time when it was out, but it's something that I think I appreciate. I appreciate it thematically a bit more now, at least what I've seen. I still need to finish it.
The soundtrack alone is one of my, I'd say top 5 anime soundtracks of all time. Maybe even Yoko Kanno's best work, I might say.
It is fantastic, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Let's see. I guess if I had to pick one more smaller thing, it would have been nice if we got the last Inuyasha season, but then at this point, the only anime that YTV airs, actually YTV isn't even airing anime anymore, does they?
They moved everything to Teletoon.
Air on Teletoon,
Yep.
yeah.
I think there's still hope for Inuyasha final act to show up somewhere, but probably not YTV.
Really?
Yeah. It's airing in the States though. I don't think it's done yet. I think it's got a few more weeks. So, I mean, it's plausible that it could show up somewhere, but yeah. So anyway, for my missed opportunity, I actually picked something a little different, which would be running Studio Ghibli movies on CBC.
That's not a bad idea, actually.
Yeah, well, as you might remember, they did air Spirited Away, and they even promoted it as, the Academy Award-winning film Spirited Away. But it showed up in a Sunday evening time slot, but it's in their, I guess, what they used to call their Wonderful World of Disney time slot.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it wound up getting edited by about 30 minutes for time. Which, the idea of editing Studio Ghibli movies is kind of scary because we know all those contractual issues with it, and it was a big disappointment.
Yeah, isn't that against the contract?
Obviously not for television, because I don't think anybody got in trouble over that, but we didn't see any more Studio Ghibli movies, and it just has this big air of disappointment around it because it's so hard to get anything from Disney on the air on regular broadcast, and the fact that CBC was able to get Spirited Away, as they do with many Disney and Pixar movies, or at least they did back about 7 or 8 years ago. They had access to it. They could have gotten it. They could have gotten more, and they could have run them all. But it's just so clear that nobody at the CBC programming department cared or understood about it. And I just feel like if someone there had cared, if someone had understood, they could have just taken that extra care or just tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, maybe let's create a promo for this movie. Maybe let's look at the other Studio Ghibli movies that Disney has. Maybe let's not edit it by 30 minutes and actually kind of treat this airing as an event rather than Sunday evening filler. And again, I mean, they had that library at their disposal. And this was around the same time that TCM was airing Studio Ghibli films. They showed up on Cartoon Network in the States as well. They aired a number of them. But again, CBC could have kind of broken ground with that, but it just wasn't able to materialize, and I think that was really disappointing.
Well, that's not exactly a burning hot ratings time slot either, right? Sunday evening. You feel like they could have been able to take a chance there with something unproven like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I mean, they stuck by a pretty rigid schedule. So yep, so much for that potential experiment.
Just before we move on real quick, was Macross Frontier ever licensed out anywhere? Did that ever air in the States or?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that could have been a pretty good follow-up to Seed, I think.
The day that they license any more Macross in North America is the day I die.
Yeah. It's actually kind of a miracle that we can still get our hands on Macross Plus on DVD.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know it was that bad.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still kind of amazed that Macross Plus even got licensed considering the Harmony Gold situation.
Oh yeah, that's true.
That was licensed after that? I thought it was licensed before that. All that stuff happened.
I don't know the exact timeline of the legal events, but yeah, we were lucky to get Plus, and we'll leave it at that. Harmony, I think whether we ever see Frontier, it's up to Harmony Gold, and at this point, I don't think Frontier is gonna make any waves with anybody who isn't already familiar with it, unfortunately. So
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And just to quickly go back to Ghibli, does anyone remember when YTV aired Princess Mononoke through that loophole?
Yeah, that was a weird loophole that they were able to get that because they got through.
What loophole?
So here's what happened. When Disney first released Princess Mononoke, they released it under Miramax.
Right.
So usually Disney holds on to the ability to distribute movies internationally, or at least in Canada. But with Miramax is a weird exception because it was kind of arm's length kind of operation.
Right.
But they actually did their Canadian distribution through Alliance Atlantis, and for years Alliance Atlantis was distributing Princess Mononoke. Obviously, this was a huge oversight by whoever was, handling the contracts for Studio Ghibli stuff. So
Yeah.
YTV was actually able to license Princess Mononoke through Alliance Atlantis and air that one movie.
When was that?
I can't remember exactly what year it was. I think it was around 2008, 2009.
Oh, really?
No,
Not too long ago?
Oh no, it was earlier than that.
Something like that.
Oh, okay.
2006.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Mid-aughts, basically. And it was weird because the version they got was actually like a work print dub. It had a few differences, from the version we're used to. It had the Japanese song over the credits at the end. Yeah, it was a few very small differences compared to the finalized dub. But, that's
cool.
Yeah, interesting bit of trivia that appeared on the station there.
January 28th, 2006.
Okay, there we go. It was 2006. Yeah. Yeah, that was a neat little occurrence. Of course, didn't lead to anything because YTV wouldn't have been able to access any other Studio Ghibli movies, and I'm sure they would have loved to, but you need to have a deal with Disney in place to do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It was still kind of amazing that Cartoon Network was able to get them, but it was all because of that TCM deal and the connection through Turner. So anyway, on to the final bit. Any hopes or expectations that you might have for anime on television in Canada in the future? And we'll start with Emily on this one.
Well, obviously, it would be nice to see some more teen anime on YTV again, whether it's in a block like Bionics or in some other format. Right now, there's so much stuff that's geared to the younger end of their demographic, but they can actually target up to teens and in their later time slots, they do want to have something that's a little bit either for older teens or younger adults. And it would be nice to see them, experiment and have a little bit of anime coming in there again. I'd also really like to see Teletoon get into airing stuff that is not just for kids as well, and getting into, teen and adult anime. They have the opportunity to do this, like their demographic is a lot wider, so they could actually do a lot more with it. And then of course I want to, see hopefully something into mainstream TV. You mentioned the Ghibli movies. It would be really nice to see some of those. I know that the things can be difficult with Disney to work things out, but every little kid that I show My Neighbor Totoro to, it falls in love with it instantly. If that could air on a children's focused station, I could just imagine the merchandising going through the roof.
Yeah, for sure. Any other stations that you think anime could work on?
Well, Showcase would be an easy one, I think. Space could probably do it, but they would have to be really focused and go for stuff that is similar to the other kinds of shows that they're already airing. So it was
horrible B movies.
No, no, they air a lot of sci-fi and fantasy type shows. Now a lot of these things have been moved around lately, but they were basically the station that was airing Supernatural for a long time. And then they get other shows like that. It would be really nice to go and see something like City get into it, but I don't know, that would be probably far in the future.
I think, unfortunately, any network broadcasters are probably out of the question at this point.
It might be, more likely for a movie or something that would already have proven itself.
Do they even run movies anymore? Maybe during the day, but yeah.
I'm not sure it's too much anymore. Yeah. I'm actually really surprised that nobody has picked up Attack on Titan yet.
Oh yeah.
Because it's already really popular and it's not on television here. So that's a no-brainer. It's something that would be an instant hit.
You could probably it could probably work on just about any station that even leans a little bit towards general interest, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So Mark, any thoughts on this or television in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the interest of full disclosure, I haven't had cable for about 5 years, so I think I feel a little disconnected from the current media state. Would I like to see blocks of anime show up again on, Teletoon or YTV? Sure. Will they actually do it? I'm not so sure. It might take a shakeup at the upper levels of management. They might look at these former blocks and think that they were maybe a failed experiment, or maybe just see it as a bit too much effort. But I would like to see those come in, but it'll be an uphill battle because now with all the streaming options, the fact that Netflix has it, there's Crunchyroll, which I'm not sure what their subscription model is, but it seems to be pretty quick to access that.
Yep.
I think that might be, where the main battle is, to be perfectly honest. And, I do like the fact that they're putting up subtitled versions sometimes the same day, I think. I think they were doing that with Naruto and some other shows.
With pretty much all their shows, with their simulcast, will show up within hours of airing in Japan.
That's pretty awesome. I think the only other problem though is that with the streaming, and maybe this is a bit off topic, but because there's no real permanence to it, you can't build a collection like you can with with VHS and DVD. So I would like to see maybe not VHS, Blu-ray. Sorry, that's how old I am. So I would like to see retail sales have a bit of a pickup. But as far as AR and TV, it might be a bit of an uphill battle when so many people are so used to downloading already.
Yeah, I know HMV, which thankfully is still around, for the most part. They are carrying a lot more titles now. They really bulked up their selection of Sentai and Viz titles in particular.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And when you compare the prices to 5 or 10 years ago, when a box set would have been $200, I mean, getting an entire 26 episode series for $20 is pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, as someone who likes to collect physical media, I am very thankful that we still have HMV in Canada. Sometimes their prices are a bit high, but we're lucky, and unfortunately it probably isn't going to last forever. But things are definitely shifting towards streaming in a way. I still think there's significance in sort of the passivity of watching things on TV, because then because even on Netflix, I mean, we love Netflix in Canada so much. And it's really one of the best venues for anime now, I'd say. But I mean, you still need that incentive to click on the title before you watch it. Whereas, something randomly running on a popular cable station and on TV, you're going to get some people who are going to discover something they weren't expecting to a lot of the time too.
Yeah. I get the feeling maybe there might be a sense that anime was kind of a fad that has passed, as opposed to being, a sort of a method of filmmaking that, really transcends every single genre. And so there might be an idea that, well, the kids aren't into anime anymore, but that's kind of reductive really, because it's never really gone away. It's just kind of waxed and waned.
I agree. It is reductive to a degree. I think it is true to a degree. But I think that to simply say anime is done, let's leave it at that, I think that's horribly dismissive. I think there's still a lot of potential to be found in that. And I think a lot of the problem is that, when we talk about television in Canada, we seem to get stuck in this conversation of, people want US TV, they don't want Canadian TV, or ideas like that. And we kind of lose sight of things from outside of North America a lot of the time, or at least, outside of things that are on like multicultural networks and stuff. So, I mean, anime kind of throws an interesting bone in that whole kind of discussion. Which,
exactly.
which is why I think that the station should explore it a little more even now. So Kevin, your thoughts on things for the future?
Well, I guess I don't expect teen-oriented anime to ever come back on Canadian network television. Like, right now, like, all we have is all the kid-oriented properties like Yu-Gi-Oh!, like Pokemon, and I think Beat-em-on's playing on Teletoon as well, but I don't know, I guess I've kind of moved on from watching TV for the most part, and like as has been said earlier, there's a lot of streaming options, legal and otherwise, for people to consume their anime now, and Funimation's even doing those simuldubs, so people that actually do want to watch the English language can start to do that now, and I can see that actually ramping up from other companies in the future, especially like you have Knights of Sidonia on Netflix, and I can see other companies following suit. I guess for hopes, I guess if I had to list a pipe dream or two of mine, I would like to see Attack on Titan on TV somewhere. I don't realistically expect it to happen, but it would have been nice. I always had this other pipe dream where, is it called Slice, that woman-oriented channel? Is that what it's still called?
It's still called Slice, yeah.
It would have been nice.
It's targeted to women my age, so.
It used to be Life Network, and then they brilliantly rebranded it as Slice.
They kind of shifted their target when they did that too.
Oh,
Only
man.
slightly, but yeah.
Like, it would have been nice to see some, women-oriented anime on that network, like Nana, like Princess Jellyfish, like Honey and Clover, like, cause I really like josei anime and manga, so that would have been nice.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to see, but, like, again, I don't think it's really realistic at this point.
It could be, but it's just how do you convince someone to take a stab at it is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
For that kind of thing, I think the key is always, sometimes you really need someone at the network who really understands anime and has a vision of what might work if they just take a small risk. And that's really the only reason that Toonami is going in the States right now. And also even in Australia, their public broadcaster has been running some anime on the youth network, ABC3. They ran Sword Art Online, they ran Madoka. I think
Oh, wow.
Yeah, later at night, of course. So, and I think there's always been people at those networks who have been interested in anime. So that's really how you kind of drive it and have people keep giving it an opportunity. And like sometimes it does well, sometimes it doesn't. But if you know what titles to pick and how to curate it and how to present it, I mean, it can really pay off. And with things like Honey and Clover, I mean, I'm sure that there's a place you can put Honey and Clover on Canadian TV and it could find an audience. I'm confident that you could, but it's a really tough sell and a really tough argument to make to somebody that it's worth taking that chance. That said, I don't really see Attack on Titan as a pipe dream. I think it's something that can and should happen. The same goes for Space Dandy and Kill la Kill. Those three titles in particular, which have all done very well in the States. I think they really need to show up on Canadian TV at some point. I think someone needs to take a stab at it. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show how we're seeing that change now where cable and satellite providers are going to allow customers to pick specifically the cable channels that they want, which is going to create a much more competitive environment for especially TV services. They're going to have to pull some wild stunts to win over audiences, and in that I think that's going to require appealing to niches quite a bit as well. So I think that we might see, if not stations that we normally expect like Teletoon or Space, I think we might see someone take a stab at it, just even as just a crazy attempt to tap into potential niche audiences with anime. It's going to be a lot more cutthroat. I think it might even be interesting to see, but I think there's a place for anime in all that, and at least those three particular shows, I'd like to see show up at some point. I think there's hope there. I don't think we should give up hope.
Call me jaded.
We still haven't actually heard anything about a TV deal for Sailor Moon.
Yeah.
With the new dub and with Sailor Moon Crystal.
Crystal hasn't even,
Crystal hasn't been dubbed yet, but that could be something that could end up being a package deal.
They haven't confirmed that it will be dubbed either, from what I've heard.
That would be missing out on a huge opportunity.
It's leaning towards they're gonna use the same cast. That's what it sounds like.
Well, we'll see what happens with that. I think there'd be a lot of potential for that new Sailor Moon dub, at least on Canadian TV, given the significant reputation that it has up here, which I would still argue is bigger than the reputation it has in the States. Easy to lose sight of that sometimes, given.
Yeah, and I would say that it would be very smart for Viz to really try to go after a Canadian network, to get Sailor Moon on here. I don't know if, I don't know how well it would work in the States. There is a significant fan population there now, but they have to really get a good time slot or it's not going to work. And it's harder because the original Sailor Moon is an older property, and so many of the fans that we have now have already seen it subtitled. And you do have a bit of a division between the fans who like the old dub versus subtitled versus the new dub. So there's a lot of variety there in the fandom, and some infighting, which I'm sure happens in every fandom.
Sailor Moon's real name is Serena, and I'll take that to my grave. I'm sorry.
But yeah, I definitely want to see it get on TV again, because it could still be successful. Again, you know, even the original series, and then eventually maybe Crystal, you know, the fixed version, not the sloppy animated version.
I will say that I know quite a lot of women in their 20s and 30s who, you know, haven't watched any anime in decades, but if you mention Sailor Moon, they will lose their minds. And so if Crystal managed to air on TV, I think it would really capitalize heavily on the nostalgia factor there.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you know, like the fans who are still big fans, they know about it and they know how to get to it. But, you know, there's a lot of closet fans. You know, they're working professionals and they don't really openly talk about the fact that they like anime or that they like Sailor Moon or any particular property. Because, like, I've run into people at work and everybody knows that I like Sailor Moon because I'm like that.
Good for you.
I wore a Sailor Jupiter costume on Halloween. I think the secret's out.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so like there'll be like the odd person who'll go and say, oh, I heard there's this new one that's coming. I'm like, oh yeah, you can go and you can watch it on Crunchyroll. Right?
That's the whole thing. I think with a title like Sailor Moon, a lot of the potential audience for that, they're not even people who you would call fans. They're just people who fondly remember it from their childhoods. But I think that that's still a substantial market. And a lot of those people are parents now too, and they'll show it to their kids.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's what voice actors are doing now.
Yeah.
They're showing it to their kids, which is there's some funny stories that Toby Proctor was telling at Anime North about that. He's showing it to his young daughters, and then they were playing with like Barbies, and I guess there was like a Ken doll or something was supposed to be Tuxedo Mask driving a car or something. You know? So they were acting things out afterwards. And at least one of them, he said, had become a big fan of Tuxedo Mask, right? But I'm not sure if they totally understood how he was Tuxedo Mask. But it's interesting. And then, Linda Valentine, when she was originally recording, her youngest daughter was, you know, like a toddler at the time and would like mimic her and stuff. And now her kids are teenagers and they don't really want to talk about it. But the first time they go with her to Anime North, they're like, okay, this is cool. You're popular. We're good with this.
It can be that easy sometimes. So, yeah.
It fits that too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Zon and Canada. Big thanks to Emily, Mark, and Kevin for coming on the show today. We'll be doing another roundtable discussion about television next episode. Got any questions, comments, or thoughts? I like to read them on the air, so feel free to submit them through the contact form at zonen.ca or tweet me at jbetteridge. Theme song is by Ultra Klystron. You can check out more of his stuff at ultraklystron.com. If you know anybody who might be interested in this show, be sure to recommend it. See you all next time.